Welcome to my Chrono deck profile. This is what I took to BSF, and I used this to get third place. Of course, I had my teammates too doing well and carrying me, I would say, throughout the tournament. But I did end up deciding to be the Jet player for the team. I feel most teams for this event were either taking Jet and Eva, and then the next best deck would go into the third slot. So our team was comprised of Eva in Seed A, I believe, and then Jet Seat B. Yeah, that's correct. And then Letitia in Seat C. That was the seating order. I think we just sat not in that order when we were actually sitting down at the tournament. But I took Jet. I felt like Jet was the second best deck. I personally think Eva is best deck in the format. So we wanted to give that deck to our best player, or who we thought was the best player, and then I just put in practice for this deck. I felt that as long as I didn't get the mirror, it would be fine. If I did get the mirror, it felt like it would be decided by dice roll. But I did also want to not play Swirler. So for this build, as you'll see throughout the deck profile, I didn't use the standard build, which I think most people, from what I saw at the event, were using. So let's just get right into it. So of course you got the starter. Grade 1 gets you the crest, really good. Grade 2 searches your grade 3 for a Soul Blast, that's also good. Deck thinning, consistency. And Jet himself, Jet is really good. After a next stage turn, or just when if you go through all your strides and just have big front row numbers, it's good for denying the PGs. That's the right deck right there. Crest, obviously. The G zone, there's only 2 cards. You run 4 of each. Personally, I never went into next stage the whole event. I don't like this card. I feel like the only time you would go into this card is if you've procced your over trigger and they're at least at 4 damage. I don't see any other reason to go into this card unless you've ran out of Fate Riders, I suppose. But I feel like this is a very unique situation to be going into this. This card, I feel you should always be going into. But let's see the main deck first. So I was reusing 2 extra jets in the main deck. Didn't want to use 3. I feel, especially since I don't go into next stage, it's very unique if I do go into it. So he's just there to deck thin, basically. I search him, reduce my deck count, and then usually if I don't have a better target, I'll use him for Fate Rider, or I'll just discard him for the ride, or for PGs or other discard things. Then it's 2 Bali. I like him. I would contemplate cutting 1 of these for a 3rd one of him. Again, because I don't go into next stage, if at all. But I do like being able to just search and remove 2 cards from the deck, just deck thinning like that. I do like the draw from him, and since I'm going into Fate Rider, he's a much nicer stride fodder card. So then we run the 4 upstream. I think this is the one card that will probably be the same in all builds. I don't think you touch this card at all in any variation of the deck. It's just good. He makes the 15 attack unboosted, and then he calls a grade 1 in case you need an extra booster or just make bigger numbers. I know for the default builds, the swirler builds, you can get out your swirlers and make even bigger numbers. For me, the grade 1 I would call out. It was for deck thinning usually, or to just get more cards in hand. That was the main purpose of him, and of course he makes good numbers. Then I ran 3 of these for the shield. I don't think he came up too often. In grade 2 gaming, he's pretty good, because 10k and most columns in the grade 2 game are 18, swinging for 18k, so This makes you 20k, so good for that. Usually the soul would be used up by GG a lot, so he would be very niche. So he was usually discarded if I didn't have Chrono Jet for discard. Then this is where some of the tech comes in. I was running 2 Eden. I wanted to run 2 Eden mainly for the mirror. I thought I'd be facing a lot of Jets in seat B. I only ended up facing 2 in the top cut, and I believe 1 throughout the Swiss. But he does put in a lot of work, I feel, especially if you're grade 2 gaming. He makes going first much more bearable, because if you go first in a mirror match, that feels awful. You need lots of good RNG to occur for you to be able to survive that. So he was good into other matchups too. I faced a lot of non-EVA, non-Jet decks. So against Youth Berks, he was good for retiring things if he could go off, or just having the pressure of being able to retire something. I made my opponent have to guard him or get rid of him as quickly as possible, so that was nice. And then my main tech choice was for Lings. I personally don't like the Swirler build. I really don't like it. I don't like random soul charging, so I don't like Swirler, Mikani, or Gungan Ram. I understand why. I feel like you just make your deck very RNG if you soul charge your triggers, your OT, or things like that. Important cards, you lose them forever. And I was running a Falcate variant before, but as people like to call it, they call that a turn late card. Turn late as in you can't pop off on turn 1, but I feel he scales better as the game goes on. But I did want to run this just to have that turn 1 advantage in case I faced the mirror or any other deck that I needed to go very fast against. And I prefer this over Swirler. You lose numbers. I think those numbers sometimes aren't important or as important. And I felt with this, I would never lose my OT. So with this version, your OT will always be live. If you draw into it, you can call it down, put it back into the deck. If you see it with this, you can put it into the bottom of the deck. So OT will always be live, and it will always be a threat in this variation of the deck. And I like the option to not have to put my triggers into the soul. Worst case scenario, which came up I think twice the whole day, was I saw a crit and a heal, and then at that point you just decide, oh, if I pushed my opponent far enough to where my heals will probably never be live, then you just put the heal in. Or do you feel like you've taken too much damage and the crit won't make that much of a difference, and you rather heal to grind them out and then win, because this game always wins the grind game just by the crest. So I felt that this was a better tech choice than Swirler, for me at least. Just a personal preference, I don't like to soul charge blindly. And then I think the most important card of the whole deck is the 4 GG. She's just live. You just combo, drop these 2 turn 1, get some good advantage. Pray they don't hit a defensive trigger and turn off the turn. That's one thing I feel that should be mentioned that's not talked about a lot in the Swirler builds. Usually in the Swirler builds, you're doing this turn 1. You have this setup right here of these 3. If you swing and they get a defensive, this whole thing just was stopped. You did not achieve the goal of that Swirler super turbo aggro build version. But yeah, I feel GG is the most important card in the deck. On place, get your card. You don't go negative in resources. So she's really good. I like her. Another important thing to mention was the whole day I would redraw. If I didn't see these 2, I would drop my whole hand and redraw 5 for them, try to get them in the starting hand. So that was one thing I was consistently doing the whole day. I would think for me personally, I prior the Soul Charger more than the GG, mainly because if it's a grade 2 game or even other decks, you want to compress your deck. If you're taking out all the non-triggers, eventually you're only going to be hitting triggers. So I felt it was more important to prioritize this card than the GG that would just be drawing you one. She's compressing it too, but it's more random. You could be drawing your triggers while she could be helping you keep your triggers in deck. So those were the main two important pieces of making the whole deck function. And then we have 3 of these. Felt these were important, but not. I thought of running it at 4. If I run it at 4, I would just be cutting one of these. But I like having 2 just to guarantee I'm taking out 2 cards from the deck. Just compressing it, making sure there's only triggers in there. The reason I would want these is I like that it's as shield. It's unlike Chrono Jet, while also being a nice stride discard. So these are both stride discards, but this one has the 5k shield in case you're ever in a situation where you need shield. There were a lot of games where 5k shield didn't come up a lot, especially in the Grade 2 gaming. And the last tech choice was 2 Jewel Core Dragons. I don't like random soul charging, as I've been saying the whole video. These were from the Falcate version. They mainly came from that, and they just made it over to this version of the list. I like that they make guaranteed hits in the early game. They're 13, and if you boost with something, they're 21. So if it's early game and you have, let's say, your grade 1, this, and another grade 1 behind it, just like this, you can swing with your Vanguard. If they get a defensive, this is still 21, so it can still hit over. So that's one of the reasons I like this. And then late game, I like that they leave the field too. There's some advantage to that. There's some disadvantage, of course. You're minusing 1 board. It's a hard commit. You have to make sure these go off optimally. They get defensives or too many defensives, they're pretty much vulnerable if you leave them out, so they kind of just go into the soul and you lose a body. But I felt they were very nice to increase the soul, have decent numbers, and not lose important cards by randomly soul charging. Then the rest is just the default stuff, the PGs, 1 order PG to help against the jet after the next age stride. And then for any other random guard restrict stuff, and then of course against the grade 4s. OT, which was always live in every one of my games. That there was never not a way to proc this, because if you draw it, you can call it, and then you just use Fate Rider to put it back, so it's live again. And you never soul charge it because there's no way to put it into the soul. If you see it with Ling, you would always prioritize putting this back to the bottom of the deck. So this is always live, or has the potential to be live. Then it's the default 8 crit, 3 draw. I prefer draw to friends. Friends are nice because you can make 1 card blocks against a lot of things, but draws are just nice to both in an aggressive situation and defensive situation, mainly just to retain hand. Then the 4 heals. So that was the main deck. Obviously I talked about the stride deck a bit, but like I've been mentioning, the Fate Rider was the most important card. Every turn I was just going Fate Rider. I would go Fate Rider, and it would always be my second swing. I know a lot of people do their stride Vanguard swing third, which I don't like. I usually had it set up this way though, so let's get a visual representation here. So this would be a very classic setup that I would have going on throughout the day. I know most people would probably, instead of having this, they'd probably have upstream, I believe. You can come up. But what I noticed from a lot of this, especially the swirler builds, was that they would do something like this, and then they would do this, and then they would use upstream to call out a grade 1, or it could go anywhere here. But then they were swinging with this third, and I don't like the concept of swinging with Vanguard third in this deck. It just feels wrong, but you're losing out on 5k to the front to 2 swings. You're only giving it to 1. That might be an important number. I feel like it's just basic math. There could be situations where I find it hard to see the situations in where you would want to swing with this third. I feel like swinging it with second is always the most optimal. So for me, especially for me, where I had this setup most of the day, I would just do, especially if it was first stride, let's assume it's just first stride, so there is no power right now. I would do 13. I would use his skill. I would flip 1 up. My front row would get a 5. I would select this to put back. And this is where, depending on soul, you could call it GG. My personal favorite was Jokor right here. Just depends on what you needed. Or you could also do Ling. So I felt like having this triple threat right here was so nice depending on the situation. If you felt your deck was already getting super small and you just wanted to compress further to hit those triggers, you'd go Ling. If you had enough soul and you felt you needed more hand and risk drawing a trigger but also compressing the deck further, while also being 13 to at least hit the 13 Vanguard, this was good. She would be, well, she'd be higher than 13, right? She'd get the 5 from the front, and you could put the 5 to her from Fate Rider. You could at least make her 23. Or, yeah, 23, 18 if you don't put the Fate Rider. And then Jokor, which is 13 by himself. Then, of course, 5 from the front, so 18, and then you can give him the Fate Rider power as well, making him 23 as well. And this is one is mainly if you don't want to draw or you don't want to touch your deck at all and you want to increase your soul. So you have 3 different options you could work with right here. So then the Fate Rider swings, you call out one of these 3. And then from there, your triple drive will decide the rest of the order in which you can do things. So that was pretty much how I was playing the whole day. I never went into next stage a single time. Even when I was proccing the OT, I felt there was times where I wanted to go into next stage, but I felt I had hands and I didn't want to discard it. I felt like I would just grind them out. The only way I could lose is if they OT me back and trigger check even harder than I did on top of the OT. So that was pretty much how I was playing the deck. In the top 8, I played my first top 8 round I played against the Demir. And I just rushed him really hard. I always had Lings. I had the full package, the turn 1, where you do the whole combo. I pushed them to 4 by their turn 2. And then I OT'd them on turn 3. The game actually went pretty long. They were able to like double heal or triple heal. I don't remember how many heals. Then they got OT offensively, and then we went back and forth until I eventually won. And then in semifinals, I played another mirror, so back-to-back mirrors. And this time around, he got OT very early. I don't remember who went first in that one, but it was just their OT came up way faster. I believe it was turn 2 or 3 when it came up, and that just was enough pressure to win the game. And then for the third place match, I played against the Youthberg. And the Youthberg player, he went first. So I just did the whole thing again, pushed him to 4 by 2. They rode up because they wanted to use their rebel form. Then on my turn 3, I just rode. And then they were already at 4 and the pressure was too much. The game was going too fast for them to be able to guard anything, and I ended up winning the game that way. So yeah, I ended up placing 3rd place. I was pretty happy. Um, Shout out to my teammates, of course, Jack, and then my brother, who were on my team. And then my brother was my practice partner. He came up with the Falke version of the list, which I really contemplated running, but I felt for this event, just having this turn one, doing the turn one combo, and hoping they don't hit a draw trigger defensively on the first swing. I was pretty much gambling on that. I was gambling on my deck compression being the key factor in a lot of my games. And it was. For the tournament I ended up playing, I believe, a Thegria, Minerva, a Youthberg, and another Youthberg, a Kyoka. That one was the hardest match I feel, mainly because I didn't know what any of the cards did. I didn't play any Eva or Jet, or I played one Jet, I believe, in Swiss. I think I might not have. I remember just playing a lot of Keter decks mainly. Oh, and I did play a Zorga, and yeah, so a lot of the mirrors came in the top 8 rounds, and there was a lot of Youthberg. I didn't expect to see that much. There was also a lot of Overlords, but that wasn't up against me. That was up against my teammates. But I also want to give a shout out to my locals and my team. My locals, TDK and Riverside, I get around 30 plus people every week, and there's a lot of good practice there. So I was able to test out this version. This specific version, I only had 1 day of testing, and that was just the 4 rounds from locals. But did well that day, so I decided to take it. I felt confident in it. That was my build. If I would have to change anything, I contemplated running only 2 in total of these, 1 in red and 1 in main. That's still debatable. This could be changed, but for me personally, I don't see what I would change it to. It's just if other players want to run this version and tech this one out, they could. And then you could take out the link for Falcates and then increase your 3 links for 3 Falcates, and then the other link for 1 more Jewel Core. That's the other version I was running and contemplated running. Edens are nice, but they're mainly for the mirror. So if you don't think you'll see mirrors, especially in the seat you are in, seat B I didn't see many, but other players said their seat B players did see jets. So Eden could be replaced if you need space for other things. Maybe you want to run more jets, more volleys, more of the grade 1 that searches jet, more of the shields guy, the grade 2 shield. These 2 slots could be exchanged. But other than that, I feel like this deck is pretty solid and it's pretty strong. I mean, the lines are there. It's pretty, plays itself. I do recommend swinging with your Stride Vanguard second. At least personally I do. But yeah, other than that, shout out to my teammates. Been rambling too long then. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed. This was my 3rd place Chrono Jet deck.